Ladies and gentlemen, our ceremony was about to begin. Would you mind standing for the arrival of the official party?
Well, at least today they have a lower podium than they did last night. I can see over this one, but not very well. Welcome, everyone, to the Women's Memorial 20th Anniversary Ceremony. We're glad you could come help us celebrate, and I'd like to ask you to please have a seat. I'm going to talk a little bit, and then we'll stand back up. Every Memorial Day, we have a ceremony here, and we have incorporated part of that ceremony into today's festivities. And one of those things that we do is put rose petals into the pool to commemorate the women who have died since our last anniversary celebration and your friends with whom you served who are no longer with us. So we'll do that later, but it's not a very good ceremony in the rain. So one of our members from Pennsylvania used to reach out to General Vaught every year and ask her to declare, because she has weather powers or some connection, to declare, like she did at that dedication 20 years ago, that it's not going to rain. So thank you for doing that again this year, General Vaught. As you can see, we've got gorgeous weather. And I think we have a really good program for you. We had a great one tonight. Those of you who are really into technology may have seen last night's festivities live streamed on Facebook. How many of you saw that or have seen it this morning? I saw it again this morning. So that's something new. It's the first time we've done that from WMSA. We are trying to let the people who cannot attend have the ability to see what's happening, the kinds of programs we're having on their phone, on their TV, or whatever. If it would be me, I would have to get one of my nephews to show me how to do it. But most folks have a nephew, a niece, or a grandkid. As I said last night, because of our financial system, the board's commitment to erasing the debt, we considered not having a celebration until the 25th, 5 years from now. But overwhelmingly, we heard from you that, oh no, we want to celebrate this. And this year in particular, we want to celebrate our ability to keep the doors open. Because of your contributions and some belt tightening that we've made, our financial situation is in much better shape than it was 2 years ago. We really honestly thought we would have to close the doors. So thank you to those of you who helped us get out of that. And I guess I need to tell you who I am. They told me I did. I'm Dee McWilliams, and I'm president of the foundation for the Women's Memorial. So I'm pleased to be with you here today. And thank you. At this time, I'm going to ask you to stand again for the presentation of the colors by the Military District of Washington Armed Forces Color Guard, accompanied by the U.S. Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. They're carrying on traditions that accompanied the birth of our nation. The Fife and Drum Corps is one of the Army's premier musical organizations. We're pleased to have them here today for this celebration. After their presentation of the colors, Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Sheffield from the Marine Corps Band, the President's Own, will sing the national anthem. She's been a faithful participant in many of our programs here and made it a mission to come to the 20th anniversary celebration. And lastly, the Navy's 26th Chief of Chaplains, Rear Admiral Margaret McKibben, will deliver the invocation. Present the colors.
Say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets in glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ho! Right! Older! Arm!
Would you pray with me?
Gracious God, we ask your presence among us as we celebrate the 20 years that the Women in Military Service for America Memorial has dedicated to the thousands upon thousands of women who have left the comfort of their homes and the security of their families and nobly stepped up in defense of our country. Hear our gratitude for the women and men who 20 years ago had a vision to encourage us as a nation to recognize and retrieve into living memory record of all those who have served to ensure our freedoms and preserve our liberty. And by the example of one, of General Wilma Vaught and her tenacity and unswerving purpose, remind us of our moral responsibility to acknowledge the contributions, the patriotism, and the bravery of those whose commitment outweighed convention, and for whom we are ever in debt. To you and to each of those who were instrumental in bringing meaning and memory into this Hall of Honor, and especially to the women who served and still serve, and who have sacrificed their lives, we dedicate this ceremony that it would be worthy of their sacrifices and faithful to their legacy. It is in the strength of your name we pray. Amen.
Would you please be seated? When we started planning for this 20th anniversary celebration, one of the first things we did was reach out to America's first two four-star generals and ask them if they would consider serving as our co-chairs, co-chairs, not just of this celebration, but of the foundation board. And General Ann Dunwoody and General Janet Wolfenbarger both eagerly agreed and said, anything we can do, we'll certainly do it for the Women's Memorial. They are absolutely committed to advancing the legacy of women's service and assuring that the contributions of our women who have served this nation's military and served the nations are recorded and preserved. Both are charter members and long-term supporters and champions of the memorial. Thank you both for being here today. We'll hear more from both of them in a little while. While I mentioned the board, I would like to introduce our board members who are present. The chair of our board of directors, retired Brigadier General Air Force Brigadier General Eden Murray. Is Eden here? Somewhere in the crowd. The board secretary, retired Air Force Brigadier General and former Chief of the Air Force Nurse Corps, Barbara Goodwin, is somewhere here. I've seen her. Here she is back here. Retired Army Major General Jan Edmonds, who has done a lot of volunteer work in helping us put this together. Retired Navy Admiral and former Chief of the Navy Nurse Corps, Nancy Lescavage. And Jody Brown, who is Executive Vice President for Public Relations at CACI International. Hi, Jody. And then we're at the point everyone has been waiting for. We have General Wilma Vaught. This is the house that Wilma built. She will tell you differently. She has a story about how some World War II women started this, and she merely got drafted into doing it because she missed a meeting. But I can tell you, no one I have ever met, and I think ever will meet, could have done what she's done for us and the women who've saved our country. So thank you. And she still comes in every day. At the memorial groundbreaking in June of '95, 22 years ago, a tradition began of having service women or a woman veteran from each of the 5 services speak at our ceremonies. Because with this memorial, we pay tribute individually and collectively to all women who serve or have served. And nobody can speak better for them than they themselves. I will introduce each of the speakers as they come up. This year we have 6 because, well, you'll see why when I ask the first speaker to come up. This is the 100th anniversary of World War I and the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War, and nurses were the predominant numbers of women who went there. And so it's a special time for us to honor the nurses. And so we're especially lucky to have someone with us who served in Vietnam and then later served when she retired as chief nurse of Chief Nurse of Walter Reed Army Hospital. After she retired, she became one of the Arlington ladies who ensures that no military member is buried in Arlington without someone present. No one is buried alone. And so that's one of the volunteers' things that she did. So Colonel Janet Southby, please come up.
Good morning. Good morning. I'll speak to my experiences as a nurse early on in the Vietnam campaign, 1965-1966. Before I do that, I want to take a moment to acknowledge all women who served. During the 12 years of the Vietnam conflict, 265,000 American women, both civilian and military, volunteered to serve in many capacities: nurses, WACs, Red Cross workers, welfare, morale, all these personnel and more. Each brought special talents and skills to support the efforts of their fellow man. The names of 8 of these women who lost their lives in military service in Vietnam are etched on the wall of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial among the 54,000. In their memory and to recognize all women who served, the Vietnam Women's Memorial was placed nearby. The Vietnam era was a challenging period in our country's history. Many of us who served were not consumed by the Vietnam experience or remain consumed, but most of us were deeply affected by it. Still, I am asked, how did Vietnam change you? The short answer is I don't know, because I've never lived my life without it. I did not expect to serve in Vietnam. In fact, when I attended Officer Basic, our advisor said not to worry. That place in Vietnam, if nurses have to go, the Corps has more volunteers than will ever be needed. Young and naive and with little concern, I proceeded to Walter Reed Army Medical Center, my first duty station, and was delighted to be assigned to pediatric nursing, my clinical preference. Less than 4 months later, however, early in July 1965, President Johnson publicly announced the commitment of 44 combat battalions to the war effort. This decision was a game changer for the nation and for individuals like me. Days afterward, I was alerted for overseas duty. Within 2 weeks, I was at Fort Bliss, Texas, among the personnel staging for deployment with the 85th Evacuation Hospital, semi-mobile. A month later, we were organized to travel as a unit to Oakland, California, to board a ship for a destination unknown. On Friday, August 13th, my 22nd birthday, we sailed out under the Golden Gate Bridge on a Navy ship with all of our hospital equipment and personnel. 300 plus, 39 of us were female nurses. I must emphasize that the significance of the next 18 days we had together on the ship cannot be overestimated, especially when we learned that our destination was the Republic of Vietnam. By the time we arrived in country, the makings of a cohesive team were in place. After arriving in Quy Nhon Harbor, we dropped anchor and spent another night on board. Disembarking down the Jacob's Ladder and onto landing crafts was a solemn occasion. We clambered into the back of a 2.5-ton truck and drove through the village with the overwhelming smell of fish. The ship's first officer wrote many years later that one of his most enduring and vivid memories stemmed from that morning. He recalled, I quote, "The sudden grim reality that you were going to war started settling over you, and the effect was almost palpable." End quote. Our equipment and personnel slowly made their way to an inauspicious site in the valley where we set up tents, organized our gear, and readied ourselves to take care of patients as the first functional evacuation hospital in country. By today's standards, the conditions were primitive. However, in spite of this, the 1965-1966 record of medical care by the 85th EVAC was impressive by any standard. We were an eclectic group of health providers commanded by a career neurosurgeon whose chief of staff was the #1 hand surgeon in the U.S. Army. And the chief nurse was an experienced, demure, wise New Englander who we all grew to love and appreciate. Much later, one of the medical corps officers wrote, and I quote, "Colonel Murphy was never mistaken for General George Patton. Yet his effectiveness as a leader and protector was perfect for this group of physicians assembled to form the 85th EVAC. We never knew all the battles that he fought on our behalf. We were clearly aware that when General Westmoreland came to visit and our lack of military demeanor was noticed, our colonel took the hit for us and never reprimanded us. Such was the story of that year. Superb medicine, marvelous comradeship, and esprit de corps unequaled. Our commanding officer could not have been better for us, to us, and with us. Our admiration and respect for him has grown through the 41 years." End quote. Many of us nurses were much younger than the physicians. However, I was not prepared for our patients to be much younger than I. They often ask, "Why are you here?" I would respond, "If you were my brother, father, husband, or son, I would want to know that American nurses were here caring for you to the very best of their ability." This satisfied them and gave us all purpose as we cared for more and more of their comrades. One of our early missions was caring for the injured from the Idrang Valley when the 1st Cav Division was engaged in a terrible battle. General Hal Moore and Joe Galloway give vivid accounts of this in their book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. Throughout the year, most of our casualties arrived directly from the field by helicopter. During those 12 months, we had over 7,000 surgical admissions. Only 96 were lost. The other group of admissions was medical, over 7,500, many with malaria, 16 of whom died. Most of us had never cared for malaria patients, and we saw other diseases that our nursing instructor told us not to worry about because we would never see them. Leprosy is an example. Many of the staff volunteered at a nearby leprosarium, and our hand surgeon did a few surgical revisions during slow times. Over time and with experience, care teams developed and became expert in dealing with their patient groups. We second lieutenants learned fast under the guidance of senior nurses and physician mentors. In fairness to my training, I must say that I never saw injuries worse than I experienced in the emergency department of the medical center where I trained. However, the big differences were there were so many of them, often so many at one time, most all young, healthy men, so far from home, in austere conditions, without loved ones there for support, and without any communication like Skype or email, even in our wildest imagination. Soon we learned the sound of more than one dust-off helicopter meant it was time to go to the hospital. Heat and humidity challenged our life-saving and comforting skills, particularly in the valley when we were under tents with wooden floors at best. 3 months after arrival, with the support of General Westmoreland, we moved to town, set up again, and to begin to upgrade our facilities. Quonset huts on concrete slabs became the standard. The two areas that had air conditioners were the operating room and the wooden building where the malaria patients were cared for. I cared for orthopedic patients the entire year, and my experience in pediatrics was put to work because all children admitted to the hospital came to our ward. They and the soldiers were good medicine for each other. Orthopedic patients received intravenous antibiotics throughout their stay. Their wounds were debrided and casted. The bloody casts soon became smelly and sometimes host to maggots that aided the dead tissue debridement but caused intolerable itching. For the badly injured and the amputees, our goal was to stabilize them and ready them for air evacuation to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines or Camp Sama in Okinawa on their way back to the USA, or the world, as they called it. So many medical and surgical innovations since that time, like intravenous catheters, have made many tasks much easier, more comfortable, and safer. Rather than stabilizing patients for 5 to 10 days, now with today's sophisticated technology and critical care support, severely injured patients can be transported to Germany within 24 hours and sometimes stateside in less than 48 hours. We old-timers, 50 years after our Vietnam experience, continue together on occasion to share our camaraderie and talk about our experiences. For example, my chief nurse attended my retirement from the Army 30 years later. Many stories have been told, retold, embellished, and even recalled totally differently. The bottom line, however, is that we were privileged, honored, and lucky to serve our fellow man when needed. When returning home, each had an intensely personal experience, perhaps welcomed by family and community, perhaps called baby killer, perhaps continuing in the military but told not to wear our uniform off base due to the anti-war efforts. These well may be stories for another day. However, it's important to acknowledge that we carried on the legacy of compassionate care demonstrated by thousands of nurses who served previous generations and paved the way for those serving in harm's way today. Preserving and honoring the history of all women who serve our nation is the noble mission of the Women in Military Service for America Memorial, and we should be proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Southby. You know, I never thought of you as an old-timer. But when you said 50 years, yeah, you're probably right. Thank you very much. I'm sure there are people who also served in Vietnam who might like to share some stories with Colonel Southby. So thanks. So from the Army, 20 years ago, at the memorial's dedication, a young woman stood here on the plaza amongst a group of young recruits. She raised her right hand, took her oath of enlistment, and joined the United States Army. Some of you may remember that. Next month, she'll be retiring here at the memorial after 20 years of service. She was a combat medic, and she's seen her share of action. Assigned to the Pentagon on 9/11, she was a first responder, giving aid to the victims. She's also a veteran of the Iraq War, served there from 2008 to 2009, and has had other assignments around the world. Her name is Staff Sergeant Cantress Noelle Mabry, and I ask that you come up now.
Good morning. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is truly a great honor to come before you today as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Women's Memorial. On October 18, 1997, I had the opportunity to be sworn in and enlisted here when I was just 21 years old. That day was the jump start of my career. I thought it was so cool to see so many women representing every branch of the military. That day I was proud to be amongst these women, but more honored to serve beside them. I joined the Army because I've always wanted to make an impact and help people. And I thought, what a better way than to serve my country? It has afforded me the opportunity to provide for my family, travel, and to continue my education. Some of my most memorable experiences include serving at the Pentagon, as she said, during 9/11, the attacks on America, speaking here at the 5th annual celebration of the Women's Memorial, deploying to Iraq, and meeting Lieutenant General Promotable Nigel West, the 44th U.S. Army Surgeon General. Serving in the Army these past 20 years has opened my eyes to what it means to be a woman in the armed forces. I am grateful to have had this experience, though I must say it has not been easy. I have to thank all the women who have served before us, who paved the way so that we too could achieve our dreams. I fulfilled my dream of becoming an Army nurse, which to me exemplifies the Army values selfless service, as it is important to conserve our fighting strength. The reason I've continued to stay in the Army all of these years is because when I became a non-commissioned officer, it was all about taking care of soldiers and helping people. And that's what I love to do. Throughout my years of serving, I've built many bonds and friendships which will never be broken because those friends are now my family. I also joined Sigma Phi Psi Incorporated, the first sorority for armed forces women, a sisterhood in which I will always treasure. I have been in many places throughout my career, and I must say I always end up back here at this special place, the Women's Memorial. I have volunteered here, I've re-enlisted here, I've held several meetings as well. With my sorority, we've also taught the children how to keep your lips closed because loose lips sink ships. And this is my very special place. It is dear to me because its anniversary is also my Army anniversary. This memorial shows how important women are in the military. And as I close this chapter of 20 years of service, I would like to thank God and everyone who has supported me throughout my career. I also would like to thank Brigadier General Wilma Vaught and Marilla Cushman for always seeing my light and allowing me to speak here today. I want you to know that I am truly proud to be a woman in the United States Armed Forces. Thank you.
An air traffic controller for the Marine Corps. She's served around the world, including Okinawa, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and is a veteran of the Iraq War. Sergeant Costello's final tour was at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point in North Carolina. There she was responsible for in-theater future deployment, redeployment of Marines who were stationed there in support of Iraqi freedom. She's also Women's Memorial Ambassador, born in Minnesota, claimed Stafford, Texas. Woohoo! That's our hometown. But she retired in New Hampshire. We need to talk about that one. With her master's gunnery sergeant, husband, and family. Please welcome from the United States Marine Corps, Master Sergeant Linda Costello.
Ma'am, I can't believe the text is we'll talk about it, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I heard an hoorah. Thank you. Good morning. Major General McWilliams, honored guests, family, and friends. I am extremely honored to be asked to speak as the voice of women Marines at today's ceremony. Yes, I grew up in Texas, and in 1985, out of the blue, I decided to join the Marine Corps. My parents, needless to say, were not very happy. None of us really had any idea what I was getting into. I was not very athletic as a kid, so boot camp was a little bit of a shock to me. I managed to make it through the physical portion, but I really enjoyed the new things I got to experience: the rifle range, the gas chamber, field day, and of course, the forced marches. My platoon, 16B, was the first women's platoon to drill with rifles in boot camp. But women were not yet allowed to qualify with the rifle in boot camp. We had to wait until we got to our first duty station. Obviously, marksmanship abilities are not based on gender. I earned multiple rifle and pistol expert awards throughout my career. I went to boot camp hoping to become an aerial navigator on a C-130, and I soon found out that that job skill was not available to women. I got lucky and found myself assigned as an air traffic controller. The first 10 years of my career, there were very few women to mentor me. In fact, I only recall serving with 2 senior enlisted females as a young Marine. Excuse me. As a staff sergeant, I had the opportunity. I need some water. Thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry about that. I apologize. As a staff sergeant, I had the opportunity to serve with a young female lieutenant who absolutely excelled at her job as my detachment commander. As a master sergeant, I was on an IG billet with a female lieutenant colonel who also excelled at her job, and these ladies were very inspirational to me, and I think we learned a lot from each other. As I rose through the ranks, I did my best to mentor my junior Marines, both male and female, because Marine Corps leadership is not gender-based. We are Marines, and we become leaders of Marines. The Marine Corps opened doors to me that I never anticipated. I enjoyed my job as an air traffic controller, but I love being a Marine. I was meritoriously promoted multiple times. I was honor graduate of academy schools. I served at 7 of the 11 Marine Corps air stations and deployed to Korea and the Philippines. My most memorable deployment was to Iraq. I was the operations chief for Marine Air Control Squadron 2, and I got to fly all over the country in helicopters and on the MV-22 Osprey, visiting our Marines at our forward operating bases. On 10 November 2007, while deployed, my squadron celebrated the Marine Corps birthday, as Marines do all over the world, in the tradition of the oldest Marine and the youngest Marine in the unit getting the first pieces of birthday cake. On this occasion, somehow, incredibly, I was the oldest Marine in the squadron. The youngest Marine happened to be a female Lance Corporal, and that almost never happens in a Marine Corps unit. We were very honored to represent our squadron forward deployed on the Marine Corps birthday that year. I was on active duty for 24 years, and I retired in 2009. My husband and I live in New Hampshire, less than 5 miles from the New Hampshire Veterans Home. As the New Hampshire ambassador for the Women's Memorial, I've had the opportunity to go visit with these women warriors that live at the Veterans Home. They're World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and Cold War vets that didn't have the opportunities that I was provided. And every single one that I've spoke with regretted that they got out of the military. Many of them got out because they got married and their husbands wanted them to get out, or they got pregnant and had to get out when their uniforms no longer fit. I am very grateful for their service because it allowed me to have a lengthy military career and be a wife and a mother all at the same time. Excuse me. And the Marine Corps has made me the strong, successful woman that I am, and my parents were very proud of me. I talked a lot about myself, but today is obviously about honoring all the women that have served this nation in her defense. Their service has allowed us to see women's roles in the military change, and many changed during my career, to include weapons handling, pilots and flight crew, leadership roles, and inclusion in combat arms. And Washington, D.C. has no shortage of memorials to our heroes: Arlington Cemetery, the Marine Corps War Memorial, and of course the Women's Memorial. And we as Americans are able to stand up and honor our veterans and our flag and understand what makes us free. And with over 2 million female vets, there's no doubt that we have contributed to this nation's success. And this memorial does a wonderful job honoring their service and sacrifice, educating and empowering current and future generations of women, and remembering those that have paved the way. Thank you, and Semper Fi.
Our next speaker is from the Navy, that is the United States Navy. And a couple of years ago, she wanted to do something to honor the women we lost in Iraq and Afghanistan. So Lieutenant Commander Courtney Johnson completed a 161-mile Valor Run, ending here at the memorial, to honor those women who lost their lives in Afghanistan and Iraq. She's a native of Orchard, Texas. Have we overloaded this on Texas women? And did you also just decide to join out of the blue? Okay, I could see the Air Force people saying that, but hello, Air Force. We have not raised our daughters to join the military. So it was always an exception when a woman would join the military. The first 3 years I was in the Army, my mother told people I had a nice government job. She changed her mind later. But back to Orchard, Texas. Commander Johnson is an aerospace engineering maintenance duty officer and serves as the maintenance material control officer at a strike fighter squadron. I was in the Army. I can't say squadron, except in the CAV. In Norfolk, Virginia. That's a nice place. She's had numerous tours afloat and ashore. Commander Johnson enlisted in 1998. Please come to the podium.
Thank you so much. And yes, we just happened to join the military because we want to get out of Texas, maybe.
Oh, yeah, me too.
No, I love Texas. Hook 'em horns.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I would like to say thank you for asking me to be here today. My brothers and sisters are out on the George H.W. Bush right now, and I feel blessed enough to be flown off so I could attend this wonderful event before I return home to them. I remember growing up and my mother and aunt telling me stories about my grandfather shoemaker when I was a little girl, which would end up molding me into the woman that I am today. He joined the Army Air Corps as an enlisted man, and he later became an officer to fly B-52 bombers. The one thing my grandfather did not count on was motion sickness he would get while flying the plane. He had to train himself to overcome this obstacle. He did this by going up in the aircraft, throwing up, landing his plane, cleaning it out, and then going up again. He did this over and over until he no longer had the motion sickness. But during this process, the enlisted men cleaned out his plane. He would clean himself off, and then he would go and talk to the men. He got reprimanded for talking to them, being too friendly. However, my grandfather felt they needed to have a bond, to trust one another because they were taking care of the plane that he would later take into combat. And at that time, that he was cleaning himself off because they were cleaning the plane that he just threw up in. I have a letter that he wrote home to my grandmother that said, "Dottie, the day I don't treat them right and respect them will be the day that I don't come home to you." I didn't realize really what that meant until years later. But after reading all his letters and doing a little homework, when I got old enough to really understand what those words meant, I knew not only did I want to join the military, but I wanted to be enlisted first and then become an officer, just like my grandfather. Going into the service, I already knew my end goal. Now I just had to figure out how I was going to get there. I wanted to be an admiral. I just had no clue what community or the support I would get to make it. My brother told me the day I was leaving for boot camp, "Girl, you're never going to make it through." He said I would be back in Orchard, Texas, population 303, within a week. My best friend prayed I wouldn't make it through, but she said deep down she knew how strong I was. She said I'd make it through, and the day I'd left, that I would never look back. So I had my dream and my end goal. Now I just had to figure out the middle. My greatest, most memorable moments in the Navy are not the moments in the Navy when I advanced or even when I commissioned as a naval officer, although they are amazing. But in fact, they are the 36 sailors that I've re-enlisted to stay in the Navy, and I have had the distinct pleasure to give the oath to. It is never a finer moment than when you lead sailors and they ask you to be a part of their career to have them stay a few more years. It is a course of the 5 days that I ran the 161 miles Valor Run for the 161 women who paid the ultimate sacrifice and who can't be with us here today. Because it's the only contribution that I could give to them. I ended that run right here at this memorial. Those moments are the proudest ones that I'll never forget. I'm sorry. It's been an amazing 19 years, and I plan on not leaving until someone tells me to leave. I still have the same goal, only now I have a community. My middle is looking pretty spectacular to me. And the support I get from my leadership, from my mentors, and my family I just can't say enough about. The Navy is my second family, and when I deploy, or even when I'm at home and my hours become long, they always step up and become my first family. Every command I go to is a unique challenge that I take with stride. VFA 87, the War Party, is my home right now. And believe it or not, I'm the only and the first female officer in their wardroom. The first female maintenance material control officer the War Party has ever had, and I get to lead the best maintenance department and the best fighter squadron on the flight line. So we're still breaking through barriers every day, and I find this crazy, but as I look at my daughter, she's right there, as she sits in her NJROTC uniform. and I think of her telling me her dreams, I know I wouldn't give up on mine for 1 second. Because just like so many women before me that made this moment possible for me, I hope to make moments possible for her. The Women's Memorial stands on those moments, so many moments. Hopes, dreams, lives given too soon. Women that went and became the first. Women who made a moment for us, all of us. The women that fought so we can be here today to celebrate the 20th anniversary, not only for this memorial that we have now, but for all of us, so that we can serve, so that we can lead, so that we can deploy, so that we can have a chance. Thank you, and God bless.
Lieutenant Colonel Ariel Batun-Bakal was an ROTC cadet and received her commission in 2001. She's had a variety of assignments. She's been a squadron commander, a White House fellow, assigned in Asia and Europe, combat tours in the Middle East, both Iraq and Afghanistan. She's our scholar warrior today. She has a bachelor's degree in government politics and Chinese, an executive master's in leadership, and she's currently at the National War College, my alma mater. She was born in Hawaii, but claims Marietta, Georgia as home. Later, maybe you can explain that one. I just don't know these people. So, if you would please come, and I'm going to say it again just to prove to myself I can. Lieutenant Colonel Batun-Bakal. Batun-Bakal. Okay, thank you.
I'm kind of excited there's a stool here. That never happens. It's good to be 5'4". Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, generals, distinguished guests, my sisters and brothers in arms, friends and family. My name is Ariel Batun-Bakal, and I am a proud airman in the greatest Air Force the world has ever known. I grew up in Georgia, and in 5th grade, I had my mind made up. I wanted to be a ballet teacher. It was a good plan. Judging from my stature today, clearly that wasn't in the cards. As an undergraduate student at the University of Maryland, I was active in my college community. I was volunteering with various student groups. I was in a sorority. I was very, very active. One day I was speaking with my mom, and I asked her about serving in the military. And at that point, I was considering the Peace Corps, and I was considering other ways to serve. And to my surprise, she said it was worth checking out. So I did, because that's what Mom says. My coworkers actually laughed at me, though, when I told them I joined ROTC. They said they thought I'd quit after I broke a nail. Here I am. I joined because I wanted to serve. I commissioned 3.5 months before 9/11. And as much as I ignored those naysayers, I did quietly wonder how a 5'4" woman with curly hair and a big laugh fit into the stereotype of who a military member was supposed to be, at least not what I saw on posters and in movies. But here's what I learned in my experience in the Air Force. My experience has been incredibly rewarding and challenging in ways I never thought possible. And I learned also to be a better teammate. Throughout the last 16 years, I've had 5 phenomenal female bosses. I've also had incredibly dedicated male bosses who valued what I brought to the fight and advocated for my seat at the table. What I found is that the Air Force values competence, confidence, and credibility. It expects you to study, train, and work hard. Confidence is built on this. The toughest challenges that I faced in Iraq and Afghanistan require me to not only survive, but thrive. Through these, credibility earns a seat at the table. So I stopped wondering how I fit in long ago, as I understood how my authentic voice contributed to the toughest tasks. My experience is that we don't seek special treatment. We only want what everyone else does: a fair shake at serving to the best of our abilities. For me, when people ask me what it's like to serve, I find it difficult to express, because to describe what it feels like to serve is like trying to describe what it is to love. It is all-encompassing, it is all-giving, it is commitment, it is sacrifice, and it's hard work. And at the heart of it, it is never about yourself. Service is a deeply personal commitment, for it is a vow to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I am humbled to stand before you, particularly before our warrior leaders who have taken the hardest path, absorbing the hardest hits for all of us. I still remember the first time I came to this memorial. I was on a run, not quite as long as her run, it was 3 miles or so. And I stood in this very place. I looked up, and it was like I had come home. I felt the presence of generations of women who stepped up to serve even before they were allowed to. Embrace us in this place. This living memorial, and I want a foot stomp, it's a living memorial, right? And I want our generations and future generations to also feel that sense of ownership that all of us that have come before us feel. This living memorial honors what is most extraordinary in us as a nation. It honors the human spirit, the strength and will in the face of adversity. It honors what us military women have always known, that courage, sacrifice, and service know no gender. For the more junior servicewomen, know that I, too, am committed to helping you navigate your path forward so that you also may serve to your greatest ability. I've got your back. Thank you, and go Air Force.
Thank you. Proof that this is a living memorial, they're still handing me notes to say, but moving right along, I usually don't like it when they say last but not least. I think I have to say this about the Coast Guard because they certainly are not the least and never have been in my mind, because after my first couple of years in the Army, I had several forts who were named the same thing, Fort Nowhere. I realized that I'd blown it on my selection of service. I would drive by those nice coastal places where they had those towers with the lights on them, and you could see the ocean and the sand and things like that. And maybe only 7 to 10 people were stationed there, and I thought, huh. Anyway, it worked out okay for me, but it really worked out okay for this person I'm going to introduce to serve. She enlisted in the Coast Guard in 1986 and served for 7 years. And I got to put something in here. For those who don't stay 20 and like Janet Southby and I get old, we're not very good recruiters for the young women of today. But for someone who served and got out while they were still young, they become the best recruiters any service can ever have because they have credibility. They're close to the age of those women. They also are the best people to inform other women about our memorial and how they need to become part of that living memorial. So thank you for mentioning that. Back to the Coast Guard. She was at Governor's Island in New York. I was at Kennedy Airport. I'm not so sure we didn't serve. It's possible to be stationed in New York and be in the military. It was not Fort Nowhere. It was my first non-nowhere. Later, Portsmouth, Virginia. And she was a crew member on small boats, medium endurance cutters, conducting harbor patrol and things like that. Her final duty station, I don't know if this was good or bad, we'll let her tell us, was Sitka, Alaska. That's kind of a nowhere. Okay. She coordinated search and rescue, and you can a helicopter unit. You can imagine the environment there. It was pretty tough. She's a native of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and she lives in Falling Waters, Virginia. If you haven't been there, it's beautiful. Coast Guard Quartermaster, 3rd Class, Miriam Thompson.
Thank you for asking me to speak today. Thank you, honored guests, and all of you who are here today. From an early age, I knew I wanted to join the military, and I wanted to serve our country. My grandfather was a tall ship sailor in the Merchant Marines and the Navy. His stories had me smitten with being underway. I was particularly interested in the Coast Guard for their search and rescue missions and their interest in the environment, their concerns for the environment. When I signed up, there were no ratings closed to women in the Coast Guard, so I signed up. When I was in Coast Guard boot camp, my sister sent me a postcard, a Navy postcard. I've forgiven you, Jeanette, for all the push-ups I had to do. I was a country girl, and I came from a small town where when somebody honks their horn, you turn around and wave and smile. My first unit was Governor's Island off the tip of Manhattan, and I thought New York was a very friendly city. But I quickly learned other things about that city, like someone who'd want to jump off a bridge, how vessels would take on water, catch on fire, or the drugs that tried to pass through our waterways, or the stowaways on cargo ships who would jump into the frigid January New York City water to catch a glimpse, to get a chance at what we serve to protect. My second unit was Dakota Northland out of Portsmouth, Virginia. That is where I met Kathy Yance, who is here with us today. She came to assist the general with the weather today. She taught me how to paint, swab decks, paint, shine brass, paint. If anybody who's been on a ship knows the order, if it moves, salute it, if it doesn't, paint it. That's where I learned about navigation. GPS was just coming out, and it wasn't very trusted then. Again, I was involved with more search and rescue, more drug interdiction, and again, involved with more people who risked their lives in makeshift, unseaworthy vessels to reach our shores. It's heartbreaking. Refugees continue to have a special place in my heart because of my personal experience with them. Our democracy is a treasure. Thank you for all of you for helping protect it. My last unit was Air Station Sitka, Alaska. I had three helicopters. There I truly witnessed our service members live the Coast Guard motto, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. In my 3 years there, I do not recall them once turning down a response to a distress call. Those air crews went out in all kinds of horrific weather. The Coast Guard got called when no one else would go out. I ran the operations center to brief the pilots, coordinated the searches, and kept the families informed of the loved ones we were searching for. Here's a story that tells a changing of the times when I served. Because it took the helicopters 20 minutes to get airborne, when a distress call came in, it was acknowledged, but then a quick moment was taken to sound the alarm to get the helicopters going, and then get back with the distress caller and get the information. When a mayday came in on the radio, you could tell the direction of the call from the radio signal. As I said, new technology was just coming out. When I was on watch, the phone rang. It was a mayday call. I said, "We'll come get you," and I hung up. I realized too late that the distress call was from one of those new things called a cell phone. It wasn't the radio. We had no direction from which the call came. When we called on the radio, vessel calling Mayday, there was no response. Sometimes the news the Coast Guard has to share with families is not pleasant. Thankfully, this wasn't one of them. I am forever grateful to the pilots who got airborne with nothing to go on, and thankfully did find a gentleman who had to abandon his sinking boat and was swimming to shore. I call it a Coast Guard miracle. If I had to name one thing the service has taught me, I would say teamwork. My heart is overflowing with gratitude for all the women who paved the way for me, all who I had the honor to serve with, and all who continue to serve. This memorial is also for those who support the armed forces, the women in the armed forces. And I would like to say a special thank you from me for the women in the USO at the airports. Their gentle kindness meant a lot to me when I was far from home. And finally, thank you to all who had a part in making this 20th anniversary celebration happen. And to the Women in Military Service for America Memorial for bringing us all together. Thank you.
General Vaught, we've talked about your being able to work magic with the weather. We need a little bit of cloud cover. Could you handle that? Seriously, it is hot. The sun is shining. Do not sit there too long. You can take your chair and go that way or that way or that way and find some shade and still hear us. But I know most of you have been in much worse physical conditions than this. If you have not, I would like to know what service you were in. Okay. Usually it's kind of trite to say it's a pleasure to introduce somebody, but it is truly a pleasure for me to introduce someone today who, when I was a first lieutenant, she walked into my office as a second lieutenant because her sister, who had been a classmate of mine in WAC officer training, had told her to. It's probably the last time she obeyed her sister. But this person became the first woman in our country and the world to be a four-star general. In 2008, General Ann Dunwoody achieved that rank. And after that, we knew it could happen. And it has happened, and we are going to prove that again today. She's had every job you can imagine. I had one of the doubters from my War College class, who is holding a high position in government today, call me when he found out she got promoted and say, well, what do you think? And he was looking for the woman to say, yeah, well, she's okay, but. And I proudly said, there is no one more qualified in the United States Army to get this star than Ann Dunwoody. And that's all the introduction I'm going to give you, ma'am.
I'm going to stand on your little stand. Okay. Here we go. Voila. Good afternoon. Here we go. How are we doing? Little toasty out there? Well, first I want to tell you what a treat it is for me to be here with you today and to serve as the honorary co-chair on the board of the Women's Memorial. So I want to, before I fall off, here we go. So I want to start by thanking the memorial members for such a great Voices of the Women tribute. You know, it should never amaze us that we have so many talented and inspirational women in our ranks. And each and every one of us though we might think of ourselves as ordinary, have an extraordinary story to tell. So please, let's give them another round of applause. Now, preserving those stories is the work of the Women's Memorial. And they are on a mission to ensure that every woman understands her story deserves to be told. And I'm proud to be part of that mission. And I'm proud to be here to celebrate 20 great years of the Memorial's commitment to military women. And I sincerely thank each and every one of you for being here today. To General D. McWilliams, Jan Edmonds, Marilla Cushman, Wilma Vaught, sponsors, to everyone who made this celebration possible, I say thank you. And let's give ourselves and you a round of applause. Today, I have the honor and pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, General Janet Wolfenbarger. When I was promoted back in 2008, I made the comment that while I may be the first woman to be promoted to 4 stars, I wouldn't be the last. And a few short years later, Janet was announced, confirmed, and promoted. And today, I'm tickled to remind you that there have been 5 women promoted to 4 stars. And you know what? We're not going to stop there. As you might imagine, this isn't the first time Janet and I have shared a stage together. We actually did an interview with Time magazine shortly after she was promoted and I was getting ready to retire. Now, I know this interview is out there on YouTube somewhere on the Ethernet, so if you have insomnia some night, you might want to check that out. Now, over the course of the years, I have learned that Janet and I have had more intersections in our lives than we knew of. First, Janet was born in Tampa, and I now live in Tampa. We both served more than 35 years in uniform, and both of our husbands are named Craig. Now, I don't know about your Craig, Janet, but when I asked my husband, Craig, a special operator, if he could ever imagine in his wildest dreams that I would become a 4-star general, he said, "Baby, you've never been in my wildest dreams." Now, you know he really didn't say that, or he'd have a bullet in his forehead instead of that smile on his face. Now, admittedly, Janet and I also have some differences. She went to the Air Force Academy, and I graduated from the State University of New York at Cortland. She majored in engineering, aeronautics, and astronautics, and I majored in physical education. Okay, so maybe I shouldn't have brought that up. But General Wolfenbarger majored in STEM's field well before STEM was cool. She was truly a trailblazer for women in the fields of science, technology, and engineering. She helped the Air Force develop and field major weapon systems, including the F-22 fighter jet, B-2 bomber, and the C-17 airlifter, and ultimately commanded the Air Force Materiel Command. I think one of the most important messages we can share with you today, and you've heard it, is that no matter where or when you served, you were and continue to be an incredibly important part of our journey and our success. And I know I would not be here and would not have had the opportunities that I had without your dedication, your commitment, and your contributions. So thank you. We
both gave most of our adult education, our lives to the military service, and we both found our greatest pleasure in developing the next generation of soldiers and airmen. Today, General Wolfenbarger continues to serve and make a difference by serving as the chair of the Defense Advisory Committee on Women in Service, DACOITS. She's on the board of directors for AECOM Corporation and is the trustee of the Falcon Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm welcome for General Janet Wolfenbarger.
Well, good afternoon. I have to say my script says good morning. So we're running a little longer than we anticipated, but what an awesome opportunity for you all to be a part of something so special. I would like to say thank you to my friend and former colleague Ann Dunwoody for introducing me. It is absolutely wonderful to once again share a stage with Ann. As Ann noted, we first met, I believe, at that Time magazine interview. And I do have to say, I was so impressed then, and I remain impressed to this day with General Retired Ann Dunwoody. So I do have to tell a little story, Ann. Just go along with me. So as we were walking out of the memorial this morning, Ann and I reached the door at the same time, and she, being the polite person that she is, said, "Go ahead." And I said, "No, Ann, you go first. You are and always will be first." I think that deserves a round of applause. I am so honored to be asked to be the speaker today for this celebration of the 20th anniversary of our beautiful memorial. Although I have to say, I'm not sure why we need a keynote speaker after those remarkable offerings from our Voices of the Women representatives. I know we've already done this. One more round of applause. They were just awesome, every one of them. It is amazing when you think about it that it has been 20 years. 20 years ago, we weren't thinking about the fact that we'd be standing here today. Back then, the tens of thousands, I heard General Vaught say 40,000 people were estimated as attendees, as participants for the dedication, and they were all alive in that moment, truly awestruck, thinking about how unbelievable it was to finally have a national memorial dedicated to remembering the service of America's military women. If you were at the dedication, how many in the audience were at the, oh, lots of hands, thank you. If you were there, or if you weren't there and have had a chance to look at the video that was made of that day, you will know what I mean. There were tears of joy, tears of remembrance on the faces of women from all eras. World War I women, World War II women, women who served in the Korean and Vietnam eras, women who were Gulf War and Panama veterans, and women who were current generation service members still wearing the uniform. We had forged our place in history. That day, we finally arrived. You know, though their ages and eras were widespread and diverse, the women here that day shared the common bond of service and sacrifice. They collectively represented every woman throughout history who has volunteered to serve a greater purpose, to accept a mission on behalf of our nation and our freedoms. It is interesting to note that what strikes most non-military people when they see the photos or the video of the dedication is that there were so many women who have served. And the word to remember is volunteer. The draft has never included American women. Every woman who has served this country from the Revolutionary War to this day is and has been a volunteer. Every single one chose to raise her hand and to swear to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, and that deserves another round of applause. You know, most people simply don't know this. They don't know that those tens of thousands of women at that dedication 20 years ago were only a fraction of the total. More than 3 million women have stepped up to the line and said, "Take me, I will serve." They don't know that even today there are about 2.5 million living women veterans and women still in uniform across the United States. And that's exactly why this memorial is as important today as it was 20 years ago, and why it will continue to be important going forward into the future. All Americans need to know that women have served since the Revolutionary War. We need to remember that women have always been volunteers. And we need to know that women have always found themselves in harm's way, whether it was on the front line fighting in men's clothing or acting as spies behind the front lines, flying planes to a theater of war, serving on ships at sea, or tending to the wounded only short distances from the heart of the battle. In fact, for much of our history, women had to fight just to be allowed to serve, to have the right to volunteer to defend what we hold so dear. Those women who refuse to sit on the sidelines are responsible for a tremendous amount of change in the opportunities available to military women today, and I have to express my own personal heartfelt gratitude to those thousands and millions who went before to give me the opportunities that I had in my service to our country. So let me just give you a little bit of a rundown. So it was 100 years ago this year that the first woman was allowed to enlist in the Navy. 100 years. We celebrated it earlier this year at this very memorial. 70 years ago, the Armed Forces Integration Act was passed, enabling women to serve as permanent, regular members of the armed forces in the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and the recently formed Air Force. That was in 1948, the same year that racial segregation was ended in the armed forces. So think about what we have accomplished since then. And these are just going to be a few little historical notes. The first woman in 1970 to be promoted to brigadier general, it was Anna Mae Hayes, who was an Army nurse. And then, fast forward 37 years later, the first woman, 2008, to be promoted to 4-star general, Ann Dunwoody, on our stage this morning. The first women to attend the nation's service academies, followed by the first women to be those service academies' top graduates. The first Navy women to serve at sea. The Air Force's first women to fly aircraft, starting with transport and tanker aircraft, and then followed after that, years later, by combat aircraft, fighters and bombers. The first woman assigned as an officer in charge aboard a Coast Guard vessel. The first Marine women assigned as embassy guards. The first women, all services, Air Force, Army, and Navy, selected to serve as astronauts. Since this memorial was dedicated in 1997, the pace of change and evolution of opportunity has continued to increase. And if we just look back over the last 5 years since the 15th anniversary, that pace has accelerated. As Ann noted, we've now had 5 women who've served at the senior-most level as 4-star generals. So I was selected as the second woman, the first Air Force 4-star general. I was followed by Admiral Michelle Howard, who was selected as the first woman 4-star flag officer in the Navy. The Air Force has had 3 women 4-stars, one of whom, General Lori Robinson, has been selected and is serving as the first woman to lead a combatant command, NORTHCOM. And I would like to say for all 5 of us, if I may, that we would not have been allowed to achieve that pinnacle of rank in service to our country across all those different branches had it not been for all of those who went before, who broke down the barriers and opened the doors. Many of you in the audience today, so thank you very much. And as Ann says, we're not done. We have just started that journey. Thank you. More recently, in the last 5 years, it was in December of 2015, almost 2 years ago, our former Secretary of the Defense, Dr. Carter, Ash Carter, opened all positions for women to serve without exception, huge opportunities now for women that had previously been closed. And since then, women have now graduated from armor, field artillery, ranger schools, infantry schools, both Army and Marine Corps. Huge progress in terms of the opportunities for women to serve. Absolutely no prohibitions now for any position across all of the services. And in terms of veterans who continue to serve, this year, both the Disabled Veterans of America and the American Legion elected women as their national commanders. Wonderful progress. And of course, on a more somber note, there is another kind of first that goes with those advancements in opportunity, and that's the numbers of women who have made the ultimate sacrifice. There are so many firsts, so many more firsts, and the memorial is here to capture all of those stories and more. But you know, the real objective is to have no more firsts. Rather, that the opportunities and successes of military women become routine. That making rank or getting a particular job is no longer front page news or even second or third page news, except maybe in your hometown newspaper. And even without that front page news, though, our history must be celebrated and it must be preserved. But if by history you think I mean only the history of all the firsts, or even the roll call of those we must mourn, far from it. Far from it. This memorial was built to capture and preserve every story. Whether you served one tour or for 30 years or more, or whether you're still serving, it's here to capture your story or your grandmother's story, and to keep it in trust for your granddaughter and your grandson to see and to understand and even to aspire to. This memorial was built to educate and provide insight to the public about military women's contributions. And it was built to empower the next generation of Americans to consider the opportunities available to them in service to their country. This memorial is ours. It exists for all of us, every American, to help us honor and remember the stories of service that have made so much possible. This memorial was built to change that standard image that comes to mind when you say the word veteran, or the word warrior, or the words honor and courage. It isn't just men. We serve too. In recognizing our memorial and all of those to whom we owe such a debt, I would be very remiss if I didn't also recognize the person who made this memorial possible and who has made it her life's passion to preserve. Brigadier General Retired Wilma Vaught, United States Air Force, who is well known to you all as the founder, the president, and now the president emeritus of the Women in Military Service for America Memorial Foundation. General Vaught stepped up to the plate, though I think she might tell you that she was dragged to the plate, when we needed someone to spearhead the campaign to design and raise funds to build this wonderful memorial. There were more than a few who didn't think such a tribute was necessary, and even some who thought it was not deserved. But General Vaught knew better. She heard the voices of the women who had so long been overlooked in history regardless of their sacrifice. She listened to their stories, and she pledged her service to make sure that not one more generation would go by without ensuring that they were recognized, honored, and remembered. She has served selflessly in this capacity ever since. Many worked hard to raise the money to build this tribute. Many are working as hard today to ensure it can continue, but no one is more responsible for our ability to be here at this place, basking in the captured light of such great legacies as General Wilma Vaught. She needs no introduction. We all know and honor her service and the sacrifices that she made on our behalf. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and please welcome Brigadier General Wilma Vaught to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I want to clear up one matter. I did not have the idea to build the memorial. That idea came from World War II women in the Toledo, Ohio area, and they did a little monument that looked like a tombstone paying tribute to the women who'd served, and they invited Mary Rose Okar, then a congresswoman, to come and ask why they had not been recognized. And that was through the Times of publicity for the Navy, or for the Vietnam Memorial. And she checked and found that was true and got legislation passed authorizing the memorial. I had retired in 1984, and the legislation started in 1985, was signed in 1986. And in 1987, I was asked to be on the board. And there were only about 5 generals or admirals in this area. And I knew the others were not going to, and I felt one of us should, so I said I would. They asked me to be president, and I said I would not. So that was in January. In March, I was sitting at home, got a telephone call from then retired Colonel from the Marine Corps, Sally Pritchett, and she said, "Why weren't you at the meeting?" And I said, "What meeting?" She said, "That board we're on." I said, "I forgot about it. What did you do?" And she said, "We elected officers, and you're the new president." And that was the end of that. And, there was a question in my mind if we even ought to do this. We had fought to become integrated, and this was taking a step to set us apart again. But after I went up around the country, talking particularly to World War II women, it was very clear this was something we needed to do. And so I set about to try to do it. And as we talked about that, we concluded that there were 2 things that needed to take place. We needed to tell the story of women's service. And number 2, we needed to pay tribute individually and collectively for that. And so we set about thinking, how do we do that? And you see the result here. But it wasn't easy. One of the things that we did was try to find a site. And as we thought about a site, we thought, well, it has to have room to build. And second, it should be on the tourist path, because I didn't want to be a part of anything that people said, "I wonder what that thing is over there." And they didn't bother to go look and see what it was. And so that was one of the other features of it. And I hoped that we would be able to find a place where there was some relationship between that site and women's service. And when we came upon this site, we weren't looking for this. The Park Service was suggesting we have a monument in the hedge. And my feeling was I never wanted to be recognized in the hedge. I didn't think you did either. And we came down here, and this place was a mess. And I said, "What is this thing?" It was dedicated by President Hoover in 1932. And so he told me that it just hadn't been taken care of. And I said, "Well, why don't we put the memorial there?" And that's when I learned a lesson. I learned that, I said, why doesn't the cemetery do something about this so it's better? And he said, it doesn't belong to the cemetery. It belongs to the Park Service. It was a potential. And we thought about it, and we thought we can build. There's a relationship. It's on the tourist path of all the people that come to Arlington Cemetery. And so that's why your memorial is right here. And we decided that we started asking for money from the bedroom on my little Apple computer with one of the volunteers from the board who was a private first class in World War II in the Army, served in London, and received the Silver Star for her service there. Not the Silver Star, the cross. Anyway, she was one of the few who received this award. So we started looking and thinking about this. What could we, and they said, we want to know where it's going to be. We solved that here. Then they wanted to know what the design was. And so we had a design competition. And we thought we had a terrific design. It called for 10 glass spires here on the terrace. And when that was publicized in the Washington Post, the Commission on Art turned it down and said we had to start over. Well, I didn't want to start over, and I finally negotiated with them to let us make a change over time, and we didn't have any money to do anything anyway. So we set that aside for then and set about doing the other things. And as we began to go out for money, and we set up for the register and created that as a way of getting people to donate and offer their money. And we tried every way we could to get them to register and donate. And then the strangest thing happened. The mail started increasing. We started getting packages and boxes, and in the boxes were uniforms, medals, documents, books. As women started sending this for it to be a part of the archives of the memorial. We hadn't even thought about anything like that. And here was all this stuff accumulating. And so now we have huge archives, and we have a wonderful library, and we have many people who come there to do research, as they very rightly should. So that happened, which was something we hadn't expected at all. And so then we started trying to find ways to raise money. And somebody suggested we raffle $1 million house. And I don't know if any of you were alive or here then, but that was the experience of a lifetime. Because at the same time we announced that we were going to have this raffle, what should happen but, and I had members of Congress who were going to speak on our behalf of the raffle. And the night before, I knew we were in trouble when they announced that the mayor of the District of Columbia was going to be in court because he had smoked heroin or something in his room. And so we drove down, and all these newspapers and TVs and everything that had told me they would be there, they were in front of the courthouse. We had one newspaper person. But we went ahead. But it was tough because Desert Storm came along, and that was a problem too. And as we approached the time of giving it away, I said, everybody wants to know when they're going to strike. I'll tell you when it is. It's going to be the day we announce that who the winner of the $1 million house is. I woke up that morning, and guess what? The president was announcing the war had started. That's the way it goes. That was just one of many things. But something good came out of that, because somebody told me that the governments of Kuwait, or of Saudi Arabia, no, Kuwait, had given $3 million, I think it was, to the USO. So we decided to approach them. And we were able to convince them to donate. And not only that, we were able to convince them to go to Saudi Arabia and get a donation. And that was all that saved me probably from bankruptcy, because I was about $500,000 in debt at that moment. But they gave. And so you can say nice things about Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. So that's some of my memorable moments. But there are other memorable moments. We got the contract which happened to be with Clark Construction, and one of the things we had to do was we had to make these doorways here. And that meant we had to break through the concrete blocks. And I can tell you that when we did the first one, which I think was this one, I was here to see if the wall came tumbling down, because I knew if it did, I would be explaining it for the rest of my life. It didn't. We survived that. And then the next thing, one of the other memorable moments was when they called me and told me they had found contaminated soil back here. And I thought, I had been afraid all along they would dig down there and they would find the remains of somebody who had been buried there back years and years and years ago. Well, that wasn't it. It was really gasoline that an airplane had probably let fuel out. And so I've forgotten how many, about 50-some truckloads of soil was taken out. They took it over to Baltimore, so be very careful if you buy any land in Baltimore. Our contaminated soil is there. But the part that hurt me was that there went my budget amount for cost overruns, all hauling contaminated soil to Baltimore. So that was, one of the other things that happened. And then as we approached, we were getting close to doing very well, getting the memorial built. And this pylon right there fell over when they dug a ditch by it where they were going to put a water pipe through, and they didn't shore it up good, and the top of it was here in the street. Let me tell you, that was the worst day of my life, I think. And it laid there for 1 year. That happened on July the 3rd, the year before dedication. And the reason it laid there was that I said, I am not paying to put this up. The contractors are, or the insurance companies are. And the insurance companies immediately said, as they always do in cases like this, it's not insured. And of course, the one contractor says it's that contractor's fault. And that one said, no, it's your fault. And this went on for 1 year as that thing laid there. That was one of the other memorable moments. But we survived it. And we finally, the insurance companies did end up paying, as they should have. And so the pylon went back up. So, we came toward dedication. And in the course of all of this fundraising and that kind of thing, we had an opportunity to get a silver dollar. This was the first time in the history of our country that our coins ever had military women in it. And we had a portrait of each one of the 5 services. And we gained from the mint, we were given money from the sale of these coins. So this was number 1. And for the dedication, we managed to get the Postmaster General to issue a stamp. This was the first stamp ever issued that showed all 5 services. There had been one issued in after World War I, I think it was, or II, that showed 4 services, but it didn't show the Coast Guard. Ours showed everybody. So that was a big plus and they were out selling at the in the parking lot of the Pentagon on the Saturday, the day of dedication. And the night before the dedication, Friday night, we had a rainstorm. It was pouring rain. And I remember coming down to the rehearsal, and our person who handles the events, Susan Davis, said, General, what are you going to do tomorrow if it's still raining? Are you going to cancel or what? I said, we are not going to cancel. These people came to see the dedication, and we're going to dedicate. At 5:30 the next morning, I got out, and the first thing I did was look out the window. The rain had stopped. And we had. And I had promised them at the event the night before that it would not rain on our dedication. And thank you, Dee, for your words about that, too. We didn't have this good a day as we have today. But we got through the dedication, and it was a tremendous event. And that night, we did the candlelight march from the Lincoln Memorial. And one of the unforgettable moments for me, because General Shali Kaslevi, who was just leaving as the chief of the Joint Service, called and asked if he and his wife could come and march with us in the candlelight march. So as we were sitting here on the platform, I asked him if he would like to say some words, and he said he would, and he did. And he said how proud he was that for his last day to wear his uniform and still be serving, this was his last day, to march with us. So that was a tremendous tribute to us for the chief, from the chief. So, one thing that as we think about this, and several people have said through this, the importance of the register and the record of the women who have served, because there was nothing like that. And you can be very proud. It isn't that you can walk in here and see it, and that if something happens here, it's all gone. Because we have all of the records that people submitted, and families come and look at them. Researchers look at them. And so you can be proud, if you're registered, that your story is there at the foundation office, and we have a big room filled with those. And that is an important facet. It's important to you, it's important to us. So I thank you for your support of the memorial, for your donations that have kept it alive. But I also want you to know that those World War II women who supported this memorial so strongly, I checked one day, and they had donated something like $24 or $25 million toward the building of this memorial. And I read here an article that had come out in 1988, after I had become president, when I said the memorial would cost at least $5 million. It cost $22.5 million just for the memorial, not for other costs that we had. So that's where we were. So, one thing I want to do in closing, one of the things that has been such a help, because, I didn't do this alone. I did this with a lot of help. And I had people who stayed through the years who are still with us. And the first one of those, and many of you who have called on the phone have talked to these people, is Barbara Bavera out here. If you are Barbara, would you come over this way? Barbara came to work with me in 2 years after I'd started, the second year, 1988, and she's been here ever since. And she did the store, and she did the administrative work. And what a service that was. And then we have Britta Granrud. Incidentally, Barbara is a retired lieutenant
colonel from the Air Force. Britta Granrud's father was a 2-star, I think it is, general in the Army. And she's that one who's been taking care of all those boxes and packages we got. She's our curator. But are you here, Britta?
That's Barbara. She doesn't want to come.
Somewhere. A third person, Leslie Simmons, whose father died recently, who also was a general officer. And she has been with us doing all kinds of secretarial type work. Are you here, Leslie, somewhere? And there is Barbara, I think, right there, who has done more than anybody else. And Britta, are you there? And Leslie. And Lisa Stone came to work for us sort of the day after dedication. Lisa, are you here? And she's been working ever since. And I forgot a very important person, Donna Houle, who started working just before dedication and who has been the director. Donna, are you here? But a person that is, from the standpoint of the dedication forward to today, who has been tremendous in every respect, it is none other, and so many of you have talked to her at one time or another, Marilla Cushman. And without her, we'd be in trouble. And she is a retired Army lieutenant colonel, and I stole her from being the person handling publicity, the public relations person for General Shalikashvili, to come and help me with the dedication, which she did. But these are the people who have held the foundation together. They deserve your applause. And I thank you so very much for all that you have done for this memorial. Hey, give me a hand. I don't want this thing to turn over. So thank you. And this may well, given my eyesight and hearing problems, may very well be my last time to ever appear at one of these events here in front. But it's been an honor to have been your president.
When I was a captain, Staff Sergeant Maddie Williams taught me about shout-outs. If you screw anything up and forget to say something about someone, just say, I want to give a shout-out too. So people have given me notes saying that I screwed up. So I want to give a couple of shout-outs. The first one is to Mr. Dave Rappaport. I'm calling him our artist in residence because he's here this weekend, so we get him a couple of days. There is a new exhibit in the memorial on this end. We've just hung it, and for the first time it was displayed publicly last night. It's stunning representation of the women who have served from all services in the last 15 years. So, Dave, maybe if you can find him, talk to him about what he did. This is Dave right here. And please see that exhibit. We also have, and some of you have been able to see the crown, I can see it in the sun, Miss Veteran America, newly crowned from the U.S. Air Force. Miss Veteran America for 217 is Lindsay Gutierrez. So she's got an interesting story, too, about how she got there and what that's all about. So we look forward to hearing from you. I'd also like to say something. We've talked about trailblazers some. Retired Navy Captain Rosemary Mariner. Navy and Mariner, it kind of goes together. She is one of the first 6 Navy women to earn her wings of a naval aviator. I'm wondering if any of the other 6 are here. Are there some? There are more? Good. Okay, thank you very much. Those are the shout-outs. Thank you for joining us today. I know it's been hot out here, but we've had some wonderful stories come in front of us. There are some things that are going to be going on this afternoon. The gift shop's open. We've got some new stuff in there. If we run low, we have order forms. We will send you stuff. You give us money, we send you stuff. But it's new stuff that you haven't seen before. We will eventually get an online store up. It's been a real slow crawl. It takes money to do those things. As we get it, we will do those kinds of things. We had a couple of members donate quite a bit of money to buy the things that are in the bookstore. And so if you buy them, it's all profit. So go shopping. When in doubt, go shopping. I want to ensure that we do something else that we did at the dedication. And that's ring a bell. Miriam Thompson from the Coast Guard is going to ring the ship's bell to officially kick off the next 20 years of celebrating women's service at the Women's Memorial. The bells, where are you? You're going to the bell? What do you say in the Navy and the Coast Guard? Let them through? It's something through. Okay. Let her pass. Okay, make way, make way. This bell is from the original Coast Guard cutter Spar, named after World War II Coast Guard women's component, the Spars. Please ring the bell. And with the beginning of our next 20 years, thank you very much. I also want to thank General Dunwoody, who had to skedaddle out of here to make a flight. She's got something tonight. And if you ever thought a 4-star general was hard and mean and not gracious, not flexible, get to know this one. I called General Wolfenbarger on Tuesday afternoon late and said, "Hi, ma'am, it's Dee. Hi, Dee, what can I do to help you?" "Well, the speaker for Saturday just canceled. Will you do it?" And she said, "Yes, I will do anything for the memorial." So, ma'am, thank you. Gracious. I never thought I'd call a 4-star general gracious. But I was in the Army, so other than General Dunwoody, who I was already retired, most of the guys weren't gracious. They were nice and smart and stuff like that. Thank you for joining us. We have some things going on this afternoon other than the gift shop, which I keep peddling. At 2 o'clock, that's 1400 for some of you who remember that way, to count the time, we will have a notable graves tour. It's basically done by history nerds, not necessarily for history nerds. We will ride on a tram. You don't have to have a ticket. The tram will come out here, but it's limited to 105 people. And the tram will go too fast for you to follow behind. So if you want to, if you miss the first 105, let me know, and I will do a repeat performance sometime in my car. This is where we're going to meet. In that shade over there, start lining up. And the first 105, that's who gets on the tram. No fighting, no pinching. Just get on the tram. It'll be a great tour. The historian from Arlington National Cemetery and a history nerd from the Women's Memorial will conduct that tour. After that, we'll have an honor walk. Please begin to assemble at 4:45. Here, it's not a contest, it's not limited, so you don't have to stand in the shade unless you really want to. There are some people who pre-purchase tickets for a tram if they do not feel they can walk the approximately mile for that walk. We'll walk through the cemetery and stop or point out a couple of notable graves, mostly in the area 60, where our most recent soldiers are. You can also, if you hadn't picked them up, pick them up. They can be picked up at the water station. I don't know where the water station is, so can somebody tell me where the water station is? Oh, it's in here, at the coat room. Finally, I can say this concludes our program. Again, thanks to Admiral McKibben, Dunwoody, Kibben, sorry. I'm a McWilliams, and I always think everybody ought to have one of those. General McWolfenbarger, General McDunwoody, General McVaught. Thank you very much. That's a way to cover up your mistakes. And to our service representatives, to all of you, will you please stand for the benediction by Chaplain Admiral Kibben, and then the singing of God Bless America by Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Sheffield from the Marine Corps.
If you would, please pray with me. Having heard but a handful of the nation's women's stories in our ceremony this morning, with the refrain of their honor, loyalty, and devotion still lingering in this place, we ask you, gracious God, to remind us that there are many more such stories, both told and untold. We ask that you would ensure that we respond to the common themes of dedication, integrity, and courage that have been shared, as to a clarion call, that we would demonstrate the same virtues wherever and however we are called to serve. And so now we pray your favor over this memorial and its rightful place in the embrace of those who have found their final resting place. Inspire us in our quest to identify those who often demur the accolades, so that we and the generations to come may never fail to offer tribute to their service and commemorate their place in America's history. Almighty God, bless the souls of those who have served, and we pray your blessing over each one of us as we seek to continue in that service. It is in the strength of your name we pray. Amen.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Thank you very much. One more shout out to the storyteller whose name I don't have. Eloise Schleuder has a great story about World War I nurses, right? And it's not hot and sunny in there, so at 2:30 in the theater, the auditorium. Thank you. Do what? Okay, another shout out. There are recycle bins in the back for your water bottles or any other thing that is recyclable. We like to be green.